heard.
Oh, good. Good. I think Matt went around town maybe today and letting the merchants know. I sent the Mayor Meyer an email.
So to volunteer, what would that entail, and what do we need to do, like outside of what it says on the poster?
That's probably it. If you want to get there a little bit early, even 15 minutes early to help set up, although it's usually set up, and then towards the end of the night, just help cleaning up. Clean the tables off. And that really is it. And right at the end of the night, who's ever left, we put the tables back into the way that they want it for the restaurant. But it's not a lot of effort. But if you could help with that, it'd be great. But, it really is. It's just a wonderful night that the whole community gets together.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to it ever since you first talked about it.
Yeah, me too.
Something beautiful about like community coming together just to like, and like eating with one another. Like I grew up with that being like a way of connecting with each other, and by like sharing food. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Like there's something about that that's just it's really great. Yeah.
It is. It's and it doesn't. You're not necessarily talking with every person there, but you might. But it really is sitting down and sharing something as basic as nourishment.
Yeah.
And the things that have arisen from that. There was a woman that came the very first Donna dinner. She said afterwards, she was in tears. She says, I lived in town for 18 years and I never connected with anyone. And she's now I finally feel like I'm a part of the town. And that really is the point of it.
Yeah.
There's well, you'll experience it. You'll see what happens. The past mayor, Mayor Cooper, always came and gave a little talk, and he's he's still alive, he's still in town. Such a wonderful guy. And I emailed the current mayor, and hopefully he'll attend. I never thought of it before. I thought about it today, just coming down here. I want to reach out to the first responders, to the fire department and the rescue squad, and ask them to come too, and the police department. They're really our community. So. All right, we'll get started. Did I get this going? Yeah, I did. My talk tonight is the third of 3 talks on the Eightfold Path, and tonight's talk is about the concentration factors. But we'll meditate first. So find your relaxed meditative posture. And gently close your eyes. Gently close your mouths. And holding your back straight, but not stiff. Your ears aligned with your shoulders, the nose aligned with your navel. And holding yourself very loosely, very gently, very lovingly. Allow yourselves to settle into this room. Settle onto your seats. Settle into your bodies. And settle into your minds. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. Just get a feel for what that's like. To be mindful of your breath in your body. And while remaining mindful of your breath in your body, notice that thoughts are flowing. We're conscious beings, thoughts should be flowing. The purpose of meditation is to not be distracted by your own thoughts. So when you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. Relaxing your thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. And we'll meditate for 20 minutes with callbacks every 5 minutes. relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. If a persistent thought or feeling arises, stay with it for a moment or two. Recognize it as impermanent and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. And we'll meditate for 5 more minutes. Take a moment to notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with your mind. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. Well, good evening. Your name?
It's Olivia.
Oh, you keep changing your hair. It's not. I should. My eyes aren't that great in the glare, so I lose your face. It's good to see you again, Olivia.
Your hair is in a constant state of becoming.
That's right. Well, some people's hair is in a constant state. As I said, tonight is the third of 3 talks on the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is often characterized as a path of heightened wisdom, heightened virtue, and heightened concentration. So the first 2 talks are on those first 2 factors of heightened wisdom and heightened virtue. The first factor of the Eightfold Path, right view, is described by the Buddha as a view that sees itself in relation to the world from a profound understanding of the nature of dukkha, or the nature of stress in the world. The Buddha simplifies that by saying right view understands stress at a very profound level. It understands its origination, its continuation, and its passing away. All 3 of those factors are an important part of understanding stress. As we develop an understanding of the impermanence of stress, and so the impermanence of all things, we cease creating self-identities by the things that are arising and passing away, simply because we understand the futility of attaching ourselves or describing ourselves in any way in relation to something that is impermanent, including our own wrong views. So the next factor, I'm just giving a synopsis of the first 2 weeks to put this week in context. The next factor of the Eightfold Path then is right intention. Remember, these 2 factors are part of the wisdom factors, meaning we're gaining an understanding of the true nature of phenomena in the world, our place in the world, and that wisdom ends the ignorance of not knowing these things. And it really is that simple and direct what the Buddha is teaching. So right intention then is the intention to recognize and abandon the causes of stress. And the Buddha describes that as the second noble truth. Craving originates and clinging perpetuates stress. So ultimately it's craving for the establishment of a self, a permanent self, in an impermanent environment. It simply can't be done because of the true nature of things. At a very basic level, we start creating identities over the things that we like and think we need to maintain our happiness. And the other side of that same coin is we create an aversion to things that we feel threaten our happiness or even threaten our safety. Aversion is simply another word for clinging. So once we create an identity of the things we think we need to be happy and the things that we need to avoid to maintain our happiness, we create an identity over that. And that's the permanent identity that is always in conflict with the impermanent nature of all things. So is that pretty clear up to that point? The next 3 factors, the virtuous factors, right speech, right action, and right livelihood, are taught not so much in a morally spiritual sense, but in a morally practical sense. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't ignore our behavior within the society we live in. In fact, as we develop the Eightfold Path, we'll be more mindful of our behavior. But in a practical sense, it's when we're engaged in the unskillful or wrong aspects of speech, action, and livelihood that it becomes apparent where our self-referential views, where our I-making is taking place, where we're trying to establish a self in an impermanent environment through our thoughts, views, and ideas. So is that clear? Again, once those views have become established in our own mind, there's no other place that they're established. They're not established in reality. Once these views become established in our own mind and we're creating identities from these views, now we have to cling to these views because we've now defined who we are to ourselves. And because that's all we think we are, anything that would challenge that view feels like annihilation. It feels like we're going to die. And many people, when they start taking up this practice, the first thing they come up against, and the first thing that comes up as questions in classes, whether here or online, is what happens when I let go of all these views of self? What's going to become of me? Because it does feel like annihilation. But remember, what you're letting go of are simply views rooted in ignorance. The Buddha describes that as like foam on the ocean. There's nothing there, even though it feels very substantial, because we've identified this as me. So that's the first 2 weeks that we've covered. Now we get to the concentration factors of the Eightfold Path. The concentration factors are taught because a mind that is continually stuck in wrong views, meaning views that are ignorant of Four Noble Truths, is a mind that is constantly distracted by the need to maintain those views. Another way of saying that is a mind that is stuck in these types of wrong views creates very powerful but subtle strategies to ignore its own ignorance. And that's another word for describing that, is a conditioned mind. A conditioned mind is conditioned towards seeing things in a way that confirms the beliefs that it has. A modern way of saying that is confirmation bias, which is a modern psychological term that says that a mind, and this is just common, this is not just as it relates to Buddhism. As human beings, we create a mind that is prone towards confirmation bias, which means that we're biased towards seeing things that will confirm the view that we hold, no matter how painful that view might unfold in our lives. Another way of saying it's conditioned thinking. Another way of saying that is karma. Karma is the unfolding of that conditioned thinking. It's not something, it's not a spiritual system of reward and punishment. Karma is simply the unfolding of our wrong views. So right effort is the sixth factor of the Eightfold Path. Now, I should say the Eightfold Path is not necessarily a sequential training, meaning you have to master right view before you get to right intention, before you get to right speech. It's synergistic, and the whole path needs to be integrated really as one philosophy, because there's times when the virtuous factors help support the wisdom factors. There's times when the concentration factors support the other two factors. There's times when viewing the world, even if we're not fully awakened, viewing the world from whatever understanding our minds have of right view or stress helps support the other factors. As we get to the concentration factors, the reason why the Buddha taught meditation, it's really the only reason he taught it, was to develop a well-concentrated mind, so that from that well-concentrated mind we can integrate the other 7 factors of the Eightfold Path and recognize when we're outside of the framework of the Eightfold Path, recognize when we're seeing the world from wrong view, or we're engaged in wrong intention or unskillful intention, or we're acting with wrong speech, wrong action, or wrong livelihood. It takes a well-concentrated mind to do that, because remember, the initial problem that all human beings have is conditioned mind, a mind that's conditioned towards ignoring its own ignorance. Another way of saying that, and a strategy that is used to do that by a conditioned mind, is to continue distraction. We create all kinds of things to keep our minds distracted so that we don't have to face the fact that we're ignoring our own ignorance. Is that clear? Is it understandable? Have you experienced that, or do you see how it fits into your life, Dash?
Yeah, I definitely notice that the more consistent my meditation practice is, the more consistently I can notice myself. Like I can notice my eye making in things.
Yeah.
And it's very noticeable. And then because like the difference is when I'm meditating consistently, I'll notice it before it happens, and I can like catch myself.
Yeah.
And then when I'm not, I still notice it, but it's after I've said something. It's after I've acted in an unskillful way.
Yes. Please go ahead, continue. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I think that's all I had. It's just more. So I don't know. It's more it's really hard to describe. Like it just happens. It's just another function when I'm more consistent with my practice.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it's supposed to work. That's why we develop concentration, and it does become automatic in the sense that it's something that we have developed. We're training ourselves to be well concentrated. And it's something that we have to do. We don't have to do it. If we want to have a well-concentrated mind, it's necessary to develop a proper meditation practice. And once you learn it, it's like learning how to ride a bike. It does become automatic. It's not something that we have to then decide, okay, right now I'm going to concentrate. It's something that just flows from the effort that we put in on our cushions to develop that concentration. So that's an aspect of right effort. I'll touch on that in a second. Right effort refers to the practical development of the entire Eightfold Path. Right effort is developing a deeper understanding of the teachings of the Buddha. I mean, we actually have to somehow start to integrate the Buddha's teachings on the Eightfold Path, and that's the purpose of our class here. It's the purpose of my books. It's the purpose of my website and some other publications, but not all publications that are called Buddhist publications teach what the Buddha taught. And that's an important distinction that I'll get to in a minute. Right now, the implication here is that wrong effort is being distracted by activities or teachings that create confusion and further the establishment of ego-centered views. Now, I always get myself in a little bit of trouble, and I'll probably get an email from someone tomorrow about this. Much of modern Buddhism is presented in a way that furthers confusion and furthers distraction from continued eye-making. And I won't get too deep of an explanation of that. And that doesn't mean that they're not legitimate religions. They are. They're simply not what the Buddha taught, and they're not part of an Eightfold Path. That's all. That's the only distinction that's important to be made there. And then we can get into all types of activities that keep us distracted from what's occurring in our life. And that's most of what we do. I've talked about this the last few classes because I was so surprised to hear what this person said. The co-founder of Facebook, and I just can't remember his name. I got to find it because I talk about it a lot. Not Mark Zuckerberg, his partner, just came out on the news and on other venues because of his concern about how successful him and Mark Zuckerberg were in developing a strategy that would so distract people it would be like a drug. And he admitted this. And he even talked about a discussion that him and Mr. Zuckerberg had as they were developing this, when they realized the implications, that this is like a drug. Should we actually move forward? And they decided there's too much. This man said, there's too much money to not move forward. They knew what they were doing. The reason why he's talking out right now is he's so concerned about watching children, including his own, where they're always on a smartphone, always engaged in social media. And he realizes this is the big drug epidemic of our modern time. And you know, I don't want to go too far into that, but that's what I see too. That we're so distracted and now addicted to that distraction that we spend our whole life looking at our smartphones. And I'm not saying every single person does that, but we're doing it. And when it happens to children, you know, children start becoming self-aware around 5 or 6. And in about another 5 years, they start creating strong views of themselves in relation to the world and how they should live their lives. And now we have 10-year-olds spending the whole day addicted to their phones. And that's really troublesome. We're getting way off the track, except to point out that we have the world itself. The underlying activities of the world is probably a better way of saying that, have been designed to continue our distraction and continue a strategy to ignore our own ignorance. And they worked incredibly well, don't they? Many of the multimillionaires and billionaires that have arisen in the last 20 years are those that have figured out the best way to distract us. And even going beyond before that, we've always given up most of our money to people that could distract us, meaning entertainers, actors, that type of things. And I'm not putting down that part of culture, but isn't it true that we spend a lot of money on things that continue to distract us? Nash, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah. One thing, this could be a big tangent, but I'll try to keep it contained. Like, why is that? I'm not asking you, but I just find myself asking myself, why is it the case that we want to be distracted, and that people, why, like, what we're doing here isn't the norm, and why this would almost, like, if I were to talk to the average person, they'd be like, oh, just, I don't think they would accept it as much as they would accept you know, the Facebook on the phone all the time. I'm not explaining it well, but like, why has the world evolved to that?
Yeah, I know. It seems, when you're looking at it from right view, even just a shred of right view, it seems insane, doesn't it? Or at least ridiculous. How could it happen? That's exactly what the Buddha questioned, and it's what he awakened to. The first factor of dependent origination says that ignorance is the first factor of dependent origination, meaning ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And it happens because of the powerful need for something that the Buddha described as like foam on the ocean, a self-referential ego self, needs to establish itself in every thought, word, and idea that occurs. And so from the very beginning, it's created very intricate, very subtle, but very powerful strategies to maintain a wrong view. And it really comes down to that. There's nothing substantial there, except it's what the world runs on. When the Buddha awakened, in the Loka Sutta, there's a great line that the Buddha said, I awakened and I looked out on the world, and the world was aflame. He wasn't talking about physically being on fire, of course, but it was inflamed from ignorance. And this is something the Buddha described 2,600 years ago. And that same situation, the world being, turn on the news for a half an hour. The world is aflame, isn't it? It's exactly the same as it was 2,600 years ago. It may be more so, or it may just seem more intense because we're so much more aware of it. But the same conditions that the Buddha awakened to and described 2,600 years ago are still prevalent today. Why? The answer is ignorance. It literally is. I mean, that's, if we're to follow an awakened human being, why it happened and how it continues is rooted in ignorance of these Four Noble Truths. And the Buddha taught an Eightfold Path to recognize and abandon that ignorance. That's the entire Buddhist teaching of what I just said. Of course, there's then 45 years of teaching that support developing understanding of Four Noble Truths. But the entire understanding is developed within the framework of the Eightfold Path and rooted in this sixth factor of right effort that we're talking about. So there's also an implication to how come there's 5 people here tonight, not 900 million? Because of ignorance, and because of that incredibly powerful need to ignore ignorance. Many people that have just come through here, I mentioned to Kevin earlier, if everybody that came here in the last 8 years kept coming, we'd be at Madison Square Garden tonight rather than right here. But I also said, I'm glad I'm here, not there. Most people stop usually the first or second time that they try with meditation because the feedback I get is I just can't quiet my mind. It's just too difficult. Now think about that. As an adult person, simply sitting quietly for a few minutes is too difficult to do. What does that mean? It means you've lost control of your mind. Literally. You cannot sit for more than you can't sit for more than 3 seconds, most people. And they're not willing to challenge that. Why is that? I'm not willing to develop a way of looking at it, even with just a couple of minutes a day of meditation, to end that constant distraction in my own mind. That's usually the first reason why people try it and they don't come back. And then as you start deepening an understanding of the implication of what this is about, recognizing and abandoning your own views, then the other 95%, and I'm not putting anybody down, it's difficult at that point. Then it's at that point that most people decide that, well, this isn't for me, because it sounds like annihilation. It can't be right. Even within modern Buddhism, the Buddha's teachings beginning with stress is seen as pessimistic. Oh, it's just all about suffering. That's all the Buddha ever talked about. But that's because nobody ever looked any further than the first noble truth. They don't realize that the Buddha taught that there is stress, there's suffering in the world, to simply establish a baseline for the problem that all human beings face. And then he described a way of recognizing and abandoning all causes of stress and suffering. He like a good doctor will first prescribe you, diagnose, thank you, diagnose the problem. He won't just say, well, you know, you got this problem, see ya. A good doctor will diagnose the problem, and he'll do it accurately within the proper framework, within the proper training, I would even say, in this case, developing the Eightfold Path. And then he'll say, this is the solution to your problem. And like a good doctor, the Buddha didn't just stop and say, you know, the problem is you're all rooted in ignorance. He said, you're rooted in ignorance. It leads to stress. It leads to these very specific problems. And within this framework, you can develop an understanding. You can cure yourself. So it's certainly not a pessimistic teaching. It's simply a realistic teaching with the solution to the common human problem of wrong views rooted in ignorance. So am I clear in there? I know we really got off a little bit on a tangent, but I think it's important within this context. And the questions always show me developing understanding of the Dhamma and the implications of the Dhamma. Right effort is the mindful effort to develop the entire Eightfold Path, meaning initial right effort for most of us is to begin to establish a meditation practice, but also to remember that it's much more than that. And if you keep coming to my class, you're going to hear this just about every week. And that means developing the entire Eightfold Path and all the ways that it applies in our lives. The Buddha's words on right effort. 1, efforts to abandon wrong view, wrong intention, wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood, wrong mindfulness, and wrong meditation, and develops right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right mindfulness, and right meditation. The Buddha concludes that with saying, this is one's right effort. If you're following Buddhism, and if you're lucky enough to be exposed to what the Buddha actually taught, and you hear that, how could you be confused about what you do? In that one rather long sentence, the Buddha describes how to develop awakening. We recognize and abandon the unskillful factors of life, wrong view, wrong intention, etc., and develop and integrate the skillful factors of the Eightfold Path, right view, right intention, etc. This is one's right effort. It's clear there. Now, the Buddha included right effort as one of those factors that he's saying that we should be mindful of, because he understood what Nash just brought up and kind of what we've been talking about. He understood the powerful proclivity of a mind rooted in ignorance to ignore anything and maintain the unskillful factors of life that we all engage in. To maintain our own contributions to stress, even as we're feeling the effects of it and suffering from it, we still continue it, don't we? And we become bewildered at times about, why is life so difficult? I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and I'm eating the right foods, and I'm going to my yoga class, and I'm trying to be kind, and I'm trying to be helpful, and yet it feels like something's missing. What is it? It's because we're caught in that feedback loop of wrong views. So our lives themselves can be outwardly wholesome, and yet there's this inner gnawing that something's wrong. There's something missing. What am I missing? The Buddha was born a prince in his father's kingdom. He had everything that a human being could ever want. And even he describes even at 5 years old, there's something missing. What's wrong? He was so frustrated with his life even then. And so at the age of 29, he left that life. That he described that life as a confining experience. Imagine that, living as a prince in a father's kingdom, having everything you want, and you recognize it as a confining space. And he went out into the world and he saw the competitiveness and the aggressiveness and the basic underlying suffering of growing old and dying. And he couldn't understand it. He saw a man dead on the side of the road for the first time in his life. And it so shocked him that if we all end up like that, what is the point? Why are we here? Why are we so competitive? What are we so competitive for? And what are we so competitive in a way to run away from? What are we trying to avoid? Aversion, another aspect of clinging. And that's when he started looking at the world from a progressively well-concentrated mind until he awakened and recognized the common human problem of craving for an existence rooted in wrong views and then clinging to those views. That's why he began the Eightfold Path with saying right view. Let me continue. Right effort also relates to organizing one's life for Dhamma practice. We actually have to do this. But it's not something that we have to devote our lives to 24/7 unless we want to join a monastery somewhere. But in the beginning, we have to start with just a few minutes of meditation twice a day. And as I've said in just about every class, we start with 2 or 3 or 4 minutes and gradually build on that. And then we start developing a broader understanding of the Eightfold Path. And as you've been describing, it doesn't take all that long to begin to understand it and develop a framework of it. And then we spend the rest of our Dhamma practice deepening that understanding. Till eventually, but in this lifetime, the Buddha taught, we can awaken or gain full human maturity through our own right effort. That means organizing time for meditation practice and engaging in a meditation practice that develops tranquility and insight is that right effort. The reason why that's there is to point out that there's all types of meditation, even within so-called Buddhism, that aren't taught to deepen concentration, but are taught for other purposes, such as just meditating, expecting Buddha nature to arise or to reveal itself to you. That's not what the Buddha taught. Or to use meditation for visualizations, sometimes very intricate visualizations. This is more a part of the Tibetan Buddhist school. Again, it's not right or wrong, it's just different. The Buddha taught meditation so we can deepen our concentration to support the entire Eightfold Path. Right effort is being a supportive member of a Sangha that maintains focus on the Four Noble Truths. And we are so fortunate here in Frenchtown that we have 3 opportunities a week to be part of a well-focused Sangha that is only focused on what the Buddha taught. And that is rare in the world. It's something that the Buddha said even back then, that a well-focused Sangha is something that is rare in the world. The Buddha describes right effort succinctly. Abandon what is unskillful. And how do we know how to abandon that? We have the Eightfold Path to show us what is unskillful. Abandon what is unskillful and develop what is skillful, meaning the Eightfold Path. This is, to me, one of the most important lines. And I remember reading this quite a few years ago, but when I was still confused about what the Buddha taught. And this is something that really got me focused on developing only what I could find that the Buddha taught. Because up until this point, I was told and I followed the view that awakening was a nearly impossible task. And it was always taught to me that even if you were to awaken, it takes endless lifetimes. Sometimes the word that was used there was endless eons, which is a lot of lifetimes, to awaken. And that was always disappointing, but because well-respected teachers and well-respected literature presented awakening that way, I figured, oh, okay, I got to at least go from somewhere. But it always left me feeling, what's the sense? You know, I want to, this is the life that I'm living. If a human being taught awakening, which I believe, wouldn't he have taught it in a way that I could utilize it in this lifetime and not eons in the future? And I was to find out that that's true. The Buddha says, if it were not possible to abandon what is unskillful and develop what is skillful, I would not teach it. If it were harmful to abandon what is unskillful and develop what is skillful, I would not teach this. Meaning it was harmful in any way to let go of self-referential views rooted in ignorance. The Buddha states, I would not teach it. And I can say that I would not teach it either if it was hurtful in any way. The Buddha continues saying that apply your efforts to develop only what is skillful. And again, how do we know it? We have the framework of the Eightfold Path. The Buddha continues, be mindful of wrong effort and enter and remain in right effort. And sometimes I I present this as a task, and in this article I say, this is the task associated with right effort. Be mindful of wrong effort and enter and remain in right effort. What's wrong effort? Wrong effort is any effort that we're using to continue ignorance or distract ourselves that is out of the framework of the Eightfold Path. I'm going to get onto right mindfulness in a second. I just want to read this too. The focus of our thoughts, or your thoughts, will determine your experience. That's the essence of mindfulness. And that doesn't mean every thought will determine your experience, but what is held in mind, which is what mindfulness is, will determine the experience that we have. So if we're holding in mind the framework of the Eightfold Path as the way we experience our life, meaning through that well-integrated right view and right actions, then our minds will be inclined towards awakening. If we're holding in mind the strategies that we've all developed to ignore ignorance, we can only become more ignorant. Doesn't that make sense? And that's the potential that each moment has. And that's that's the refined view that is developed through the Eightfold Path and through being mindful of right effort. What am I contributing in this moment? If what I'm contributing is towards awakening, meaning what I'm contributing to my own life is framed by the Eightfold Path, then I will become awakened, gain full human maturity. And if I'm ignoring, and people, especially that now that you know, there's no going back, now that you are aware of the Eightfold Path, it takes an effort to continue ignorance, doesn't it? Even if it's a subtle ignorance that we might not always be aware of. But in this moment, if we're ignoring what we understand as the Four Noble Truths, or ignoring the Eightfold Path, then we can only be contributing to our own ignorance and to become further ignorance. That's the reason why the title of my new book is Becoming Buddha, Becoming Awakened, to point to the potential of each moment. And that's what the Buddha taught. And it doesn't mean we should be hyper-vigilant or clinging to the present moment. There's no such thing as the present moment in useful awareness. What we should be mindful of is our life as our life occurs in a very gentle but very mindful way. What am I holding in mind in this moment? Distracted thoughts focused on fleeting desires, achievements, and acquisitions can only lead to more confusion and stress. Thoughts and actions that create additional self-identities, even altruistic self-identities. That's the problem, one of the biggest problems with this movement of modern engaged Buddhism. I see a lot of engaged Buddhists that have disregarded their practice and now are promoting only a view as a right view, and everybody should conform to this view. And usually the views are rooted in something that is wholesome and realistic, but the intention behind that has a strong quality of eye-making and can only create tension in the world. And that's exactly what it does. Thoughts that establish and reinforce the ego personality in any manner, in any realm, can only lead to more distraction, confusion, and stress. There's many modern schools of Buddhism, and then religion in general, and I'm not beating up religion, I'm just saying that it's different, seek to create a self-identity in another realm, maybe a future birth. The biggest Buddhist religion teaches that if you keep a certain chant on your lips at all times, most importantly when you die, if this chant is on your lips in your mind, then you'll be taken to this Buddhist heaven for everlasting peace and happiness and watched over by a certain God. Sounds great. Maybe it's true. It's not what the Buddha taught. But it's a way of ignoring what's occurring right now, isn't it? I don't have to live my life. I can just say this thing over and over again, and when I die, I'm good to go. Often suffering is taught that it's okay to suffer, because if you suffer long enough and hard enough without too much complaint, you'll get a reward later on. That's not what the Buddha taught either. The Buddha taught to recognize the origination and the passing away of all things, and to cease the need to create an identity that insists that things be different than they are, different than what's occurring. So this whole idea of creating other self-referential views, or the establishment of a self in other realms other than what's occurring, which is just another very subtle and powerful strategy to continue to ignore ignorance, continued eye-making, is a part of a lot of modern Buddhist schools, somewhat inadvertently, until you understand the history of where these things began, which is just a couple hundred years after the Buddha passed. It's in the book, and I won't get into that description tonight. But modern Buddhist concepts of an inner Buddha nature or achieving Buddhahood, meaning as a reflection of Buddhahood, is often portrayed as almost like a Buddhist heaven. That Buddhahood means that you're now joining with the Buddha and all the Buddhas of the world, rather than taught as simple human awakening, gaining full human maturity. The concepts of inner Buddha nature, achieving Buddhahood, or rituals and practice engaged in with the intention for more favorable experiences in rebirth. And that's a lot of what the rituals and practices are engaged in modern Buddhism. I was part of and took vows in a specific Tibetan school that there was a lot of doctrinal teachings from later sutras, not what the Buddha taught. Mostly the Heart and the Lotus Sutra. And then there was an awful lot of rituals and chanting and bowing and prostrations. And in that school, it's taught that your Dhamma practice really doesn't begin until you've done 108,000 actual prostrations, meaning from a standing position, you go fully prone, touch your head on the ground, stand up. That's one. And you do that 108,000 times until your real Dhamma practice begins. And again, I'm not putting it down. It sounds pretty difficult, doesn't it? But it's not something that the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught that right now we can start our Dhamma practice by developing the Eightfold Path. These concepts are introduced in the later developed Buddhist religions that adapted the Buddhist teachings to accommodate individual and cultural influences. Often, continued establishment of the ego self or continued eye-making is the result of these accommodations. And you really can't help doing that when the practice itself is, what am I doing? I need to do this to gain merit, or to be the right type of Buddhist in any particular practice. And all of the later practices, beginning about 100 years after the Buddha's passing, started putting labels on their specific type of Buddhist practice, something the Buddha never did either. He never created a special name for what he was teaching, except it's called it the Dhamma, or even his own Sangha. In other words, nearly every modern sect, religion, school of Buddhism has created their own name. And in some ways, they say that this is exactly what the Buddha taught, but it's a little bit different too, and hence the name. Let me continue with this. Mindfulness in the context of Four Noble Truths is to abandon the distraction of stress arising from craving and clinging and remain focused of the entire Eightfold Path. So the next factor of the Eightfold Path, we've covered what right effort is right mindfulness. So right mindfulness implies that there's such a thing as wrong mindfulness or unskillful mindfulness. And if we remember that mindfulness means to hold in mind or to recollect, we can hold in mind anything, can't we? And just because we're being mindful of something does not necessarily mean that it's going to lead to any good for anyone. And just to use an extreme example, and I can use a general term, unfortunately now, think of any of the violence that we've heard about recently. Those people that were the perpetrators of those, whatever particular act of violence, were holding in mind the need for violence, weren't they? That's mindfulness. So again, I'm using an extreme example to point to it's important to recognize what we're holding in mind and if it's skillful in relation to the Eightfold Path. Because even if it's a wholesome thought, but it is a self-referential thought or a thought that continues eye-making, it's only going to continue confusion, delusion, and unsatisfactory experiences for ourselves. Excuse me, and maybe for many others. Another example of that, unskillful mindfulness leading to hurtful ideologies. Ideologies are formed because enough people agree on something. It might just be a few people, but because of the agreement of this ideology, the individuals feel empowered to proclaim and act on that ideology. So going back a few hundred years, the Christian Crusades are an example of that type of mindfulness. Most of the people, and I'm a little bit sensitive to this because I have a little bit of Hawaiian background, not Hawaiian blood, but Hawaiian background. Interest in Hawaii, I should say. The people that came and conquered Hawaii, at the time, Hawaii had a worldwide, it's often portrayed as they were just backward savages. And, Hawaii had a worldwide economy, even at that time. And yet, Europeans came and decided that they needed to make it different. And they did all types of things to convert people to Christianity, including awful sacrifices. And this was part of the Crusades, wasn't it? All of those people that did it thought, and they were sincere, that they thought they were doing the best thing. They were following the word of God. The problem with the modern jihad, isn't it? They're doing it in the name of God. They're doing it in the name of ideology. They're holding in mind something that is rooted in ignorance, but using it to justify their actions. Again, I'm using an extreme view to point out something that we all are susceptible to holding in mind something that is rooted in ignorance, that can only contribute to at least our own suffering, and usually to the suffering of people around us. It's interesting that it's something that, I wish I could remember his name, that this partner of Mr. Zuckerberg recognized but chose to ignore, at least when he decided to go for the money. It's exactly the same thing. In ideology, his ideology was a great scheme on making a lot of money by preying on ignorance. Many useful applications of mindfulness have been developed. Some applications of mindfulness techniques have greatly enhanced the health field in dealing with pain and stress. I'm talking about mindfulness-based stress reduction. It's a wonderful practice that has greatly helped an awful lot of people in dealing with physical pain and stress and all types of physical and mental difficulties. It's just something different. And it's a useful application of mindfulness. The only reason I'm making an emphasis on that is that mindfulness-based stress reduction is often taught not by the founder. John Kabat-Zinn, who founded it, is very careful to say that this is not a Buddhist teaching. But many people will engage in that and substitute that type of mindfulness for the mindfulness that the Buddha taught, and it's something different. And there is no need to abandon any mindfulness technique for specific health issues as long as they do not reinforce your ego personality. It is not skillful to equate the mindfulness of the Dhamma with modern applications of mindfulness. The generally stated purpose of modern mindfulness techniques is to manage mental and physical pain and stress. Again, I'm not saying that that's wrong. It's just not, and it's often helpful just to see that that's different than the Dhamma practice. The Buddha taught mindfulness in very specific ways. The mindfulness of the Dhamma is to develop understanding of Four Noble Truths and the complete cessation of stress, our own individual contributions to stress. The Buddha taught mindfulness. Mindfulness is to recollect or to hold in mind, meaning to be mindful, to abandon wrong view, and enter and remain in right view. Be mindful to abandon wrong intention and enter and remain in right intention. Be mindful to abandon wrong speech and enter and remain in right speech. Be mindful to abandon wrong action and enter and remain in right action. Be mindful to abandon wrong livelihood and enter and remain in right livelihood. Be mindful to abandon wrong effort and enter and remain in right effort. And that really relates to attaching or adapting or embellishing the Buddhist teachings in any way. And the only reason I say that is it's very easy to have other wholesome practices in our lives, such as yoga. Yoga is for most people, it's a very healthy act. A lot of injuries happen, but it's unskillful to combine what the Buddha taught with your yoga practice, or with an exercise practice, or with something that you're using to develop maybe wholesome views, but not necessarily views framed by the Eightfold Path. The point is that right effort is an effort that develops the Eightfold Path and does not confuse it with other teachings. That's what the Buddha is referring to. Be mindful to abandon wrong effort and enter and remain in right effort. Your effort in the Dhamma is focused on the Dhamma. Be mindful to abandon wrong mindfulness and enter and remain in right mindfulness. Be mindful to abandon wrong meditation and enter and remain in right meditation. Again, implying that there's such a thing as wrong mindfulness or unskillful mindfulness or wrong meditation or unskillful meditation. The reason why the Buddha is teaching this also is from his own experience. prior to his awakening, he studied with the foremost spiritual teachers of his time and mastered their teachings and mastered their meditation techniques very quickly. So much so that these teachers tried to coerce the Buddha. Well, it wasn't the Buddha then, it was Siddhartha Gautama. Tried to coerce Siddhartha to become their representative in the world. And the Buddha rejected both of these. These teachers were called Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta, who taught very similar teachings rooted in the Vedas. The Buddha rejected both of them, saying, your teachings do not lead to the understanding I'm seeking. He didn't say that they're wrong or bad or anything. They just don't teach what leads to his understanding. The meditation techniques that he used and mastered, he recognized then as an aspect of wrong meditation, because it only led to deeper confusion in his mind, and he recognized in people that were practicing this type of meditation. And the 4 Foundations of Mindfulness is a series of talks that I gave a few months ago now, maybe a month ago. There's a series of 7 talks. And in there, the Buddha goes through, in relation to a general wrong view of the world and wrong effort, these specific meditation techniques that were simply confusing. These meditation techniques, one technique was focused on and develops this understanding, not an understanding, a quality of mind of nothingness. And the other meditation leads to a quality of mind of neither perception nor non-perception, which sounds really ridiculous. And again, I don't want to get into the explanation of that. Both were commonly sought after qualities of mind even during the Buddhist time, and they're still taught today in some of the modern Buddhist schools as states of mind to achieve, when the Buddha simply taught that these were qualities of mind that are simply rooted in ignorance, and there's no value in any of those. So right mindfulness and right meditation. Right meditation is Shamatha-Vipassana meditation. The only meditation method that the Buddha ever taught was Shamatha-Vipassana meditation. And remember, he taught that primarily for deepening concentration. Now, there's other suttas that have been taken out of context. 2 of them specifically is the 4 Foundations of Mindfulness, the Satipatthana Sutta, and the Anapanasati Sutta, meaning Anapanasati means mindfulness of the breath. Satipatthana means the 4 foundations of mindfulness, or the 4 frames of references. In both of those suttas, the Buddha gets into a description of different types of breathing, a long breath, a shallow breath, a deep breath, and variations on that in both of these different suttas, simply to point out that when you're meditating, you may find your breath presenting itself differently. You may find yourself with a breathing deeply. You may find yourself breathing very shallowly, a short breath. You may find other breaths in your body. The Buddha pointed out in both of these suttas to simply be mindful of them, so to not be distracted by it or analyze that, or to overemphasize it by trying to create a long breath or a short breath. Just to recognize how your breath is presenting yourself and come back to that sensation of breathing in your body. Don't be distracted, because what are we doing then if we're trying to force a breath or trying to analyze where a breath is coming from? That can only come from a self-referential point of view, from a personal experience. When those teachings are taken out of the context of the entire sutta, it seems like that's what the Buddha's teaching. But that's a good example of later developed teachings rooted in I-making that create something when it's not there. Because when you look at both of those suttas very clearly, the Buddha is describing initially how to be mindful. And what he's saying is to be mindful of whatever's occurring, and in meditation, come back to the sensation of breathing. In both of those suttas that I mentioned, it also gets into contemplations. One is called a contemplation on a charnel ground. A charnel ground is a graveyard. And the Buddha is simply using that as an example of the impermanence of the body, and to recognize that when a body breaks down, it gets pretty disgusting. Why would you want to associate with a body that turns into fluids and maggots and all this stuff? Pretty disgusting. There have been whole meditation practices developed around just that, to spend your whole meditation practice contemplating the disgusting nature of a decomposing body, thinking that somehow you're learning something. The Buddha taught simply to recognize that, to reinforce the need to not create identities over something that is as impermanent as the body. So again, right meditation is the meditation method that the Buddha taught to deepen concentration. Throughout the Buddha's teaching career, he taught that meditation has two qualities. One, it has the quality of developing tranquility by being mindful of the breath. And then the quality of developing insight into the three marks of existence. So it's a well-concentrated mind within the framework of the Eightfold Path. Let me say that another way. It's a well-concentrated mind that is able to support the refined mindfulness of the Eightfold Path, to integrate the Eightfold Path as a way of life, that is able to gain insight into the impermanent nature of all things, the wrong views of self rooted in ignorance, the not self characteristic anatta, and the resulting confusion, delusion, and ongoing suffering that results from a misunderstanding of the first two, of impermanence and the not self characteristic. It's the belief that who I think I am in this moment, even though those views are rooted in wrong views, are rooted in ignorance. It's the belief that this is who I am and this is a permanent self that I can continue to establish in a permanent way. That is the essence of ignorance, isn't it? Because even a practical view of a human being has to recognize the impermanence of that human being. In a truly and honest physical sense, who we were as a physical being when we walked in here just a short while ago is completely different. Millions of cells came into existence and died off in that short period of time. So even the physical nature of ourselves is not the same. It changes from moment by moment. The fact that there's continuity, that continuity obscures the fact that great change has taken place. In fact, it's the essence of disease and wellness, that process of cells coming into existence and going out of existence, isn't it? Isn't it? Influenced by other factors, of course. The same is true about our thinking. Hopefully this was a skillful enough Dhamma class that some changes, maybe very subtle changes in the way we think, just like the physical changes that have taken place, the possibility for very subtle changes in our thinking may, and I hope, have occurred. And so if they have, and I think you might say that they have, we are completely different people in this moment than we were just a moment ago, aren't we? And that depends, and this clearly shows what has occurred here just in a few minutes, clearly shows the potential and the possibility of each and every present moment. If we understand the impermanence of all things, we can use that when it's well framed by the mindfulness of the Eightfold Path. We can use that to develop awakening. Maybe I should say it even simpler. We can use that to awaken. That's the true and only useful power in the world. It's what the Buddha awakened to. Whether we're going to live our lives rooted in ignorance or develop the Eightfold Path through continued right effort and awaken. And each and every one of us has that potential. Again, that's what the Buddha awakened to. When the Buddha taught, upon the Buddha's awakening, he sat for another 2 weeks, considering, is there a way to teach what I now know to overcome the common human problem of ignorance? And how can I do it? A practical way of looking at it is, how do you teach a deluded mind that it's deluded? How can a deluded mind recognize that it's deluded? How can it? It needs another way of looking at itself. It needs another framework, and that's the Eightfold Path. That's the importance of right effort, meaning to develop a meditation practice to deepen concentration, to support the refined mindfulness so that we can integrate the entire Eightfold Path. So that's the concluding talk on these three factors of the Eightfold Path. Any questions about tonight's talk, and then we'll go around the room? All right. Isabel, good to see you tonight. How's your practice and how was your class tonight?
There was a lot that I was taking in. Yeah, I guess I was just thinking about, I started reflecting a little bit on my day with what we're talking about. It's like my week. But I was coming, like trying to, but I was present. It just, I would have thoughts. They would just occur, and it's a little bit of a different person, coming, and I guess whenever I come here, I just leave different, and in a way that is, I realize like how much I feel like I'm in that space of like self-annihilation right now, like this annihilation of this conditioned self, and that I'm aware of it, and that is a little scary for me. So, I'm trying to stay gentle with myself.
Good.
Gentle, and when I meditate twice a day, I try to meditate at least 5 minutes twice a day, and when I do that, it's a lot easier for that practice to work, for all of this, for me to develop everything, and it's for me to be able to like use it instead of, because it's becoming more of the knowledge of it, and now I'm using it in my everyday life, whether it's like interacting with people or just when I'm with myself, or it's just a lot. It really it's kind of hard to put words to it because it's just happening. There is no really way to explain it sometimes. It just is happening.
Well, it is difficult to put words to it, but you described it very well. And you described integrating the practice in a very practical way. Even that feeling of annihilation, that's a common fear when people start really developing the practice. It wouldn't develop, that feeling of fear and annihilation wouldn't develop if you weren't actually developing the Dhamma, because it's a rather common experience. And you also describe when you meditate, it's not such a powerful feeling, is it? And because that fear and annihilation is an aspect of a distracted mind. So the more well-concentrated our mind is, the less reactive we are to developing the Dhamma. But it's also very common, and like we're talking tonight, that's why we need to be mindful of right effort, that we just need to continue to persevere within the framework of the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path itself, as it becomes integrated, provides the ability to be gentle with ourselves, because it just supports that view that this isn't something that, while at times it's difficult, when it becomes harsh, if we're well concentrated, we realize that that's because of a harsh judgment of ourselves, rather than just being gentle with ourselves. So you said a lot tonight. Thank you. Nash, good to see you tonight.
You too, John. It was a lot to take in.
Yeah.
There were a few times where I kind of felt like really joyful. Like one was when you talked about, because I've heard a lot about and just people saying like about manifesting things and thinking about things, and there's someone that comes into the coffee shop that talks to me a lot, and he's talked about like how your perception is a lot, or his view is that your perception is literally reality, and that's all that there is to it. And hearing you say that like a mind framed in the Eightfold Path will develop the Eightfold Path, and will so that kind of like tied into a lot of other things that I've heard, and I find that that's the case a lot of the Buddhist teachings, is that other things that I've heard and other theories about the world are like these teachings from 2,600 years ago are saying that as well. Yeah. So it's really nice to have some things click like that sometimes.
Yeah.
And an observation that I noticed tonight while meditating, and I notice a lot, is when I'll go into like a chain of thoughts and I'm not able to recognize and pull myself out. When I do pull myself out, I find myself like hunched over almost, and like my head's bowed, and I'm not doing that on purpose, and I just kind of like, why am I doing that? And I like straighten myself out, and so I was kind of thinking about try to think about why that is. Maybe just my thoughts weighing me down. I don't know. This is an interesting observation I had tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first, what we hold in mind is going to determine our experience. So if we want to develop the Eightfold Path, we hold it in mind. Another way of saying that is what we associate with will also determine our experience. And so we can associate ourselves with ideas or ideals, associate ourselves with all types of things, or we can keep it well framed on the Eightfold Path. I don't want to get into. I was going to talk a little bit about manifestations, but I won't. Well, just to say that if I'm going to manifest something, what I want to manifest is awakening. I don't really, because that kind of covers all the other things that I might be interested in. Now, the kind of slumping a little bit during meditation.
So maybe I just need to.
Well,
train my back.
I don't think about it often, but because you said it, I do. I find myself doing that occasionally. This is sitting up straight is not forced, but sitting up straight is my most comfortable meditation posture. But oftentimes I'll find myself, or sometimes even going backwards a little bit rather than just centered. So you might notice people have commented online, which means they're peeking at me rather than. But even in meditation, I'll sometimes rock myself back. I'm doing this consciously. Now, after many years, because what I'm doing is just kind of finding a center and letting my body settle there. And I don't think about doing this as when you said it. I know that sometimes I'll feel myself a little bit forward or a little bit back, and I'll kind of just do this. So it's not right or wrong,
right?
But recognizing that your posture right now is not conducive to comfort is a good thing to recognize and come back to that posture. Sometimes we're just tired, and that's okay too. We all work hard and live busy lives. Just get tired. Thank you, Nancy. Olivia, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you.
I'm sorry I don't always recognize you.
It's fine. The last few times I was here, my hair was down.
Yeah.
And then when you didn't recognize me before, my hair had always been up, and it was when my hair was down. But now that my hair's up, then yeah, it's no big deal.
It's not. It's not. But it's not just that. My eyes aren't that good anymore, so I have a condition. So, but it's good to see you as much as I can.
Definitely a lot of information. Definitely effective. Definitely effective in helping or being aware of the things that I identify myself with, certain people. And that's something that I never really thought about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I always just kind of thought that is part of who you are,
Yeah.
But I guess identifying with it too much. It's just a dumb example would be in high school what crowd you're in.
Yeah.
Thinking
It's a good example.
Where we don't really have that anymore. well, maybe, I guess, in the adult world. But I guess that's jobs and other things.
Yeah.
So that's something that I need to be aware of. I guess as far as like manipulating, well, not manipulating your breath when you're meditating, whenever I'm just walking around breathing my daily life, I'm not aware of it. So then when I am meditating, I am aware of it. So I don't really have a comparison as to if I'm manipulating it. I know I'm not going like
Good.
that or anything, but I still can't compare it because I'm so unconsciously like breathing, you know, when I'm going about my normal day. Does that make sense? Like,
oh yeah,
I'm unconsciously unaware. What else? I guess that's all I have for right now.
Great. Thank you.
I've been having like brain block lately.
Oh, you described it very well, developing the Dhamma. And, you know, initially, and it's probably the most difficult thing for people to overcome initially, is just to be willing to look at their eye-making and to understand that there's a process going on that you have a choice in. And that eye-making is often expressed through associations.
Wait,
So,
eye-making? Can you give me like the definition for that?
Well, another often unfriendly word is conceit. But living life through self-referential views and trying to establish those views in everything that occurs is eye-making. And we do that. The strategies that are always used is to associate this with something else. Meaning, it might be with a group of friends, it might be with political ideals, it might be with a restaurant in town. You know, it could be anything. But we create identities over that, and that's called eye making. And when you know your eye making, when you say I like this or I don't like that, that's kind of the essence of it. And it doesn't mean we don't have choices in the world. I don't want to get into that. What about like our origin? Well, again, it's one thing to recognize that I'm German and Italian. That's just the truth. But when I see it this way, I'm German and Italian, and you're not. It's the same situation, isn't it? But it's eye making. When we start creating specialness or personalness, when we're taking things personally or establishing a permanent self in any way, that's eye making. Because
we're more than just those things, right? That's the reason.
I would say we're more, but we're not. But we're also not those things, because those things are rooted in ignorance, and they're like foam on the ocean. So there's no reason to even associate with that.
Yeah, because you could, be proud that you're Italian and then live your whole life, as an Italian, and then find out on Ancestry or something like
that you're not. Yeah,
you're devastated.
Well, that shows how foolish it is to create identities. Now, there's nothing. I'm not, because somebody's going to question this. Well, does it mean you shouldn't be proud of who you are? That's not what I'm saying. I mean, I'm fortunate for the Italian and the German influence in my life, for the foods that I've learned to eat, et cetera, and that type of thing. But to have it define me only creates it's the confining space that the Buddha taught, because it's just a consequence. Everybody has to come from somewhere if you're going to have a human life. It's the way it works. In the way human beings are, they're often from one place or another. So there's no great significance to it, is there?
What about your intentions and like your virtues?
Does
that define?
Well, I would say that it does define you. Intention is the underlying factor of everything in life. In other words, if I don't have the intention to get up here and walk out the door, I'm not going home tonight. I first have to generate that. It sounds silly, but I have to have the intention to get up and move, don't I? Everything that we do is a result of intention. Now, as far as the Dhamma is concerned, awakening is framed by right intention, meaning the intention to recognize and abandon craving and clinging. So being mindful of the intention for everything that we're doing is important, and then that leads to from a well-concentrated mind, that can lead to being mindful of right intention in this moment. And that leads also to virtue. In this moment, am I acting in a virtuous way? In this moment, you might find yourself, not that you would do it, but someone might find themselves, I might find myself gossiping about someone tomorrow. But I'll remember, because my mind is a little bit more concentrated, wait a minute, that's hurtful to myself and to other people. I don't want to do it anymore. What did the Buddha teach me? To recognize it and simply abandon it. Not judge myself harshly for doing it, but practice restraint at that moment that my behavior is outside the framework of the Eightfold Path, and simply abandon it. And that is reinforced by holding in mind right intention. Do you see how one feeds the next? Yeah, I think you do, because you asked the question that way. So good for you. You've developed a great understanding of the Dhamma in a very short time. So, like I always say, be very gentle with yourself, and just allow it to unfold, and you'll continue to see the practical benefits of teachings.
I'm patient.
Yeah, good. That's Kshanti is the Pali word, patient forbearance.
Well, I'm not patient, but I'm patient when it comes to this.
Good. Well, that will develop outside of this too.
Right.
Nas, did you have a question or a comment?
I was just one thing that kind of helped me understand what eye making was sports teams, and where I'm from, you're either, because we're right on the Illinois and Wisconsin border, either you're a Bears fan or you're a Packers fan, and you despise the Packers or you despise the Bears, respectively. And it's just always, I don't know, I found myself on the outside because I moved there later, and I always thought it was so strange. Like, you guys all live together, why do you, like, even my stepdad and his brother were on opposite sides, and they would just get in these arguments.
Yeah. Over football.
Yes, over a game.
Yeah.
So that, I don't know. Hopefully, do it. Maybe not listen to me. Don't listen to me.
No, that's a great example of eye making by association. And so if you hate the Bears, when the Bears lose, you feel great, don't you? But there's hundreds of thousands of people having a lousy day. They're feeling good. I mean, the whole idea is a little strange, isn't it? I've been a lifelong Yankee fan, but not to the point that, they don't win. I still sleep good at night. It's more because I'm familiar with the team than anything else all these years. It always surprised me how people would pray that their team, to some God, that their team would win. How could that, I mean, when I was younger, how could that work? Because does it mean on this Sunday, God's making the Packers lose and the Bears? It seems pretty capricious, doesn't it? And do I want to believe in it? It all leads to a lot of confusion and a lot of eye making. Thank you. Kevin, good to see you tonight. And thank you. Kevin's wife, Robin, reframed those from the awful frames that I had to those beautiful frames. Thank you so much.
Very nice.
And Olivia, there's some good info on there about eye making that I'll go over with if you want to take a look at it. Thank you, Kevin.
I hope I don't do too much eye making over getting those frames done. Actually, it's funny because when I was meditating today, it was coming back like, oh, I get to take those things. And sort of like, okay, let that go. That's not going to be impermanent too. But this is very heavy. I mean, each of these sections of this part of the Dhamma could take probably take lifetimes to develop, but could take a whole evening just on one, and then the next, and the next. Yeah. It's so deep. It's so intense. And after and if I had just been coming here for like a month, like you have, or a couple months, it would be, I think, overwhelming. You're reading about it and stuff, and I've read a lot of different things about it, and it's still intense.
Yeah, it is.
So, and it's still. The right effort. Effort is such a, you concentrate on it, and then it's this battle between effort and eye making. It's a battle between every step of the Dhamma and the eye making. The about between the Dhamma and those three marks of existence that keep going back and forth.
Yeah.
But we keep doing it, and the meditation really does help keep focused on whole Dhamma.
Yeah.
It's I think it's something worth continuing to do.
Yeah, I'm glad you think that way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. It ultimately is a battle with eye making, because it's ignorance that gives rise to eye making, and it's wisdom that ends that. And again, it can seem like annihilation at first. The best example of what happens when you're awakened and the benefits of it is the Buddha himself. He awakened. He certainly didn't become annihilated, even though there's some teachings that teach that. He awakened, became an awakened human being, a fully mature human being, and lived the most important and effective life anybody's ever lived. But he taught others how to do exactly the same thing too. So we're not losing anything of any value. We're only losing that which can only contribute to further delusion and suffering. It's good to let go of it. Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we finish with Metta? And just a reminder, next Tuesday is our Dana dinner. So please come. There's info on crossrivermeditation.com, but it begins at 6 o'clock at Love and Oven, just down the street. So there'll be no class next Tuesday, and next Thursday is Thanksgiving, so there won't be a Thursday class this week, but there'll be a Saturday class this Saturday and a Saturday class next Saturday, and we'll continue with our regular schedule after that.
What time is the Saturday class?
8:30 in the morning. Yeah. I hope to see you here. It's good to see you.
Normally I have to work, but I have to work till 12.
Oh, great. I'll see you Saturday.
Yeah.
I'm not trying. It's always good to have you. You bring a lot to our Sangha. All of you do. So we'll finish with the Metta Sutta. So find your relaxed meditative posture, and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. Take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body again. And let that mindfulness of your breath cease any distracting thoughts to the past or to the future, or that may have arisen from our talk tonight. And these are the Buddha's words on Metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class. Peace.